Around the world, a race is underway. A race to build the most advanced chips, not the snack, but the semiconductors. These chips are the brains of modern-day electronics. They power every gadget that you use. They are a strategic asset. They also make a very lucrative business, an industry worth over $500 billion. Now, India wants a slice of this pie, but India's ambitions have suffered a blow. A major joint venture has collapsed. Vedanta and Foxconn have decided to part ways. They announced a partnership last year, a joint venture. The plan was to set up a factory to manufacture chips. The deal was worth $19.5 billion. Now it has collapsed. The question is why? Why did the deal go sour? India wants to become a hub for building chips. Will this setback hurt New Delhi's plans? That's what we'll discuss tonight, starting with the latest. Foxconn and Vedanta called off their joint venture yesterday. Foxconn is a Taiwanese company, a major electronics manufacturer. Vedanta is an Indian company, a leading natural resources conglomerate. They joined hands in September last year. Foxconn had the expertise in technology. Vedanta understood the raw material needs. It also knew how to operate in India. So it looked like the perfect partnership, at least on paper. Turns out it wasn't. Their joint venture lacked an important ingredient, the know-how of building chips. What they needed was a technology partner, and they did look for one. Reports say a European company had been identified, but the talks remained deadlocked. Apparently, this player wanted more skin in the game. In the end, it did not work out, and the deal fell apart. India's Minister for Electronics and IT spoke about this. His name is Rajiv Chandrasekhar, and this is what he said, I'm quoting, "It was well known that both companies had no prior semiconductor experience or technology and were expected to source fab tech from a tech partner." That did not happen. Vedanta and Foxconn had submitted a proposal. They were seeking permissions for a factory, but without a technology partner, they couldn't move ahead. So the joint venture has collapsed. Now that is the official explanation, but there could be more to this story. Since the joint venture was announced, the plan saw repeated changes. Initially, the state of Maharashtra was chosen to set up the factory. This was in July 2022, but in September, the project was moved to Gujarat. Apparently, they offered better incentives. Then there were regulatory troubles. Last month, Vedanta was fined. India's markets regulator SEBI imposed a penalty. This was over the semiconductor joint venture. SEBI said Vedanta did not disclose its partnership with Foxconn in the right manner. And Vedanta was asked to cough up around $36,000. And now, about 2 weeks later, the whole thing has been called off. So what looked like the perfect deal became a series of hurdles. No partners, no permissions, and now no deal. Like I said, we don't know the full story yet. Vedanta and Foxconn say they want to work independently. India's Communication Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has said, and I'm quoting, "Both Foxconn and Vedanta are committed to India's semiconductor mission." Vedanta says it has other partners lined up. In fact, let me quote from their statement. "We will continue to grow our semiconductor team. India remains pivotal in repositioning global semiconductor supply chains." What about Foxconn? They say they're evaluating their options and they want to establish what they call, and I'm quoting, "a diversity of local partners." In fact, let's look at the full statement. Foxconn is committed to India and sees the country successfully establishing a robust semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem. But it doesn't mean the Taiwanese giant is exiting India. They have other operations. Foxconn makes Apple products like iPhones in India. It has a factory in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. Recently, Foxconn said it will make 20 million iPhone units there, plus employ around 100,000 people. Foxconn also has plans to build a new factory in Karnataka. Having said that, these are all assembly plants. India wants to graduate to manufacturing, and it has just the right conditions. So the plans have not been derailed, they say, but they'll certainly be delayed. And to that extent, it is a setback. You see, India is very keen to position itself as a global electronics manufacturing hub. It has just the right conditions, a big market, a large and young workforce, and enough space to accommodate large projects, both physically and politically. For the longest time, China had this advantage, but American sanctions and geopolitical tensions are forcing companies to look for alternatives. And this is where India comes in. This is where India stands a chance. The government senses an opportunity. It wants to attract global players. It is focusing on the production of electronics, both for domestic consumption and for exports. In fact, the government has launched special manufacturing schemes, offered incentives worth over $6 billion. Some projects have already taken off, like the one to make smartphones in India. Companies like Apple have latched onto these incentives. They now want to make 18% of their iPhones in India. Same for chip manufacturing. Similar incentives are on offer. In fact, recently a major deal was announced. US chip maker Micron will set up a plant in India. The project is worth $2.7 billion. So it's all going in the right direction. But what we have so far are small wins. India has not been able to get the big players. Foxconn and Vedanta are parting ways. Intel has not spelled out any clear plans vis-a-vis India. Neither has TSMC, that's Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. Now, these are the big guns. They will have to be roped in. It's okay to start with assembling electronics, but to win this game, you have to move to manufacturing and eventually to chip design. So this is a setback, and India has a long way to go. As NATO leaders meet in Europe, a new security challenge is emerging in the Pacific. China is spreading its roots. It may end up with a military base in the Pacific. The Americans are throwing a fit, but the deal is done. A deal between China and the Solomon Islands. They say it's all about police cooperation, but it will have much wider implications. So let me tell you about it. The Prime Minister of the Solomons visited Beijing. His name is Manasseh Sogavare. If you watch this show, you know who he is, China's man in the Pacific. So indebted to Beijing, financially and politically, that he faces the wrath of his own people. Now, this Prime Minister went to meet President Xi Jinping and he heaped praises on China and its leader. Listen to this.
Mr. President, we watch all the bullying that is happening in the world today. And I admire where you stand amidst all those very trying times. And Mr. President, you are taking the lead, and the Solomon Islands and the small island Pacific countries admire the stance that you take. This speaks of the visionary leadership you continue to take on all the issues that is happening in the world today.
He's calling Xi Jinping a visionary. It says a lot about his own political myopia. The Chinese president reciprocated with this announcement.
I am very pleased to jointly announce with you, Mr. Prime Minister, that China and the Solomon Islands will establish a comprehensive strategic partnership featuring mutual respect and common development for a new era. I wish that the two sides will take the occasion of your visit to enhance strategic communication and deepen cooperation in various sectors.
So they have a total of 9 deals now, including the one about policing. They haven't shared the specifics. All we have is a joint statement with some vague proclamations. It says China and the Solomons are building a quote-unquote comprehensive strategic partnership. They've specified 2 areas, law enforcement and security matters. And I have a quote. This is what it says. The Chinese side will continue to provide support and help to Solomon Islands as needed in strengthening Solomon Islands' police law enforcement capacity. Well, this can mean anything, really. Training the police on the Solomon Islands, or working with them on a real-time basis, or perhaps even deploying Chinese security in the Solomons. You know what that means? A Chinese military post in the Pacific. The US is sounding an alarm. It is demanding answers. The US National Security Council issued a statement. It wants the full text of the agreement. And they have good reason to be suspicious because the new deal builds on an earlier pact, a pact that was signed last year. Again, the details are scarce, but some pages of the draft had leaked. They mentioned the PLA and the possibility of a Chinese military base where Chinese soldiers could potentially be deployed in the Pacific. When these details were leaked, the Solomon Islands denied them. But the rebuttal only added to the mistrust, and China's actions did not help. You see, Beijing is making deep inroads in the islands. They already provide police training. They've donated replica guns, at least 22 police vehicles, 30 motorcycles, 8 drones, and riot control equipment like water cannons. This is what China has given the Solomons in the last year. In response, Prime Minister Sogavare had called for deeper security ties with China. In fact, I have his statement from last year. This is what he said. Going forward, I would like to see a more permanent arrangement in place. I think it is prudent that Solomon Islands and the People's Republic of China start discussion on how we can elevate the current joint training arrangement to a more permanent arrangement with clearly defined expected outcomes which aim at ensuring that police have capability in the long term. Those were Sogavare's thoughts last year. And he made his intentions quite clear. He wanted a permanent arrangement with the Chinese. Now he has it. Where does that leave the West, the US and its allies? Where does it leave them? Outmaneuvered by China, and not for the first time. When the security pact was signed, it caught the West by surprise. They were not paying attention to the Pacific. The Americans scrambled. Suddenly, after 3 decades, they reopened their embassy in the Solomons. They reached out to regional players with some help from Australia. They even organized a summit, a US-Pacific summit. But these were all late moves. Now China has a deal that will most likely lead to a military base. In the battle for the Pacific, this round has gone to Beijing. Now to Africa, a continent with a lot of potential, unlimited resources, an untapped market, and a young demographic. Africa has all of it. The world was late to realize this, but now they've woken up to the fact. China was the first. It invested billions and lured African nations into a debt trap. Then there were the others, the United States, Europe, even India, all looking to enhance their ties with Africa. But now the continent has an unlikely suitor. The Islamic Republic of Iran, their president is making a beeline for Africa. His name is Ibrahim Raisi. And he will embark on a rare tour. He will visit Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. It's the first trip by an Iranian president to Africa in 11 years, so clearly it's being talked about. But what is Raisi doing there? Why does he want to go to Africa? Why is Iran suddenly courting Africa? You see, the Iran of today is an isolated country, both politically and economically. There are sanctions imposed by America, a battered economy, the protests last year, and its waning influence in West Asia. So the regime has come up with a new strategy, diplomacy. Tehran is engaging with friends. It is also engaging with its enemies. Basically, it's doing everything it can to forge alliances. Case in point, Africa. In March this year, President Raisi hosted a meeting with African representatives. He pitched Iran as a different kind of partner, different from the typical colonial West. And now he's touring the continent. The obvious focus is trade. Iran and Africa have a robust bilateral trade. It was just over $1.2 billion last year. This is a 107% rise from 2021, but it's not enough, far from it. Tehran's footprint in Africa pales in comparison to its neighbors, the likes of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Look at the numbers. In 2021, Turkey's Africa trade, the bilateral trade, was over $34 billion. So clearly, Iran has a long way to go. Same for diplomatic presence. Currently, Tehran has less than 20 embassies in Africa. Compare that to Turkey. They have embassies in 44 African nations. So there's a lot of catching up to do. And it won't be easy. Not all African nations trust Tehran. Morocco, for instance, cut diplomatic ties in 2018. Relations with Egypt have been rocky. And these are two economic powerhouses in Africa. And Tehran knows that. So it's waving the white flag. In June, Iran's foreign minister issued a statement. He said they're willing to restore ties with both Morocco and Egypt. It's not clear when that will happen, but Iran sounds desperate. Look at their recent moves. On the 8th of July, Raisi met the Algerian foreign minister. He talked about boosting ties. Last week, Iran became a member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a group that includes Russia, India, and China. In June, Raisi set out on a tour of Latin America. He visited Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And now he's going to Africa, pushing for stronger ties. That's a lot of engagements and travel in 2 months. Iran calls it a new policy of openness, but the world sees it for what it is: economic and political compulsions. Iran goes to polls next year. It will be a big test for Raisi's regime. He came to power with a promise to fix the economy, and look at what he's achieved: rampant inflation and a falling rial. That's the Iranian currency. It's falling. So they need an economic boost, and for that, they need the world to help them, hence the outreach. Deals with Latin America and Africa will help. If it works out, it's like hitting 2 birds with a stone. Iran will save its economy and reclaim some space in global politics. You just saw those pictures from Beijing. Xi Jinping held delegation-level talks with the Solomon Islands. Big, long tables on both sides. Also lots of diplomats and bureaucrats in attendance. But one big name was missing: China's foreign minister, Qin Gang. He should have been part of the Chinese team on Monday, but he was not there. In fact, he's been missing for 2 weeks. His last public appearance was on the 25th of June. He met with officials from Sri Lanka, Russia and Vietnam. Last week, Qingang was supposed to host Joseph Borrell. He is the European Union's top diplomat, but the meeting never happened. China postponed it, saying the dates were no longer available. Fishy, right? Well, people started noticing it. Multiple reports emerged questioning Qingang's absence. Was he sick? Was he missing? Or was he sidelined? At first, China did not say anything. The foreign ministry claimed it wasn't even aware of such reports. But earlier today, they made a U-turn. Beijing said Qingang would not attend the upcoming ASEAN-China meeting. Why? Because of health reasons, they say.
State Councillor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang cannot attend this ASEAN ministerial meeting.
So no Qingang. Instead, Wang Yi will represent China. You may remember him, the previous foreign minister, still very powerful in China. He heads the Communist Party's foreign policy wing, which actually makes it a strange equation. When leaders visit Beijing, they meet Qingang and Wang Yi. Antony Blinken did this last month. So did Russia's Sergei Lavrov in February. And there's a lot of overlap between these two men. Qingang is the government's foreign policy chief, the foreign minister of China. Wang Yi is the Communist Party's foreign policy chief. But in protocol, Wang Yi ranks higher. Why is that? I guess it's party over country in China. Either way, the foreign minister is still on leave. The ASEAN meetings are on Friday, so his absence will last at least 3 weeks. In many ways, this whole incident sums up China and how they operate. You cancel a foreign visit without saying why. You dismiss reports about your top diplomat's health. Then hours later, you confirm all of that with one sentence. Most countries would have just released a statement, perhaps avoided all the speculation, but not China. Their first instinct is to hide and dismiss. And this practice goes right up the command chain. Let's rewind to the Wuhan virus pandemic. By 2021, most world leaders had been vaccinated. In fact, they got their shots on live TV. Guess who did not? Xi Jinping of China. Beijing would not even say if their president was vaccinated or not. It was only in July 2022 that they confirmed it. The obvious question again is why? Why does China keep hiding the health of its leaders? Some experts blame insecurity. Remember, these are unelected presidents and ministers. If they're seen as weak and unhealthy, their position can be challenged. Another reason could be instinct. We've seen it over the years. China's government first hides, then it blames others. We saw it with the pandemic. We also saw it during the recent spy balloon saga. So nothing to be surprised here, but it will be interesting to see when Qingang returns. He took over as a foreign minister last year. Before that, he was China's ambassador to the US. Rumor is he's a fierce wolf warrior. So aggression and insults come naturally to him. If only transparency came just as easily, we could have avoided this mess. Either way, we'll be looking out for his next appearance. Our next story is from Sri Lanka, and this is a very important week for them. The first anniversary of the anti-Rajapaksa protest. You may remember these pictures. The presidential palace in Colombo was overrun. Protesters were lounging inside. Then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was on the run. That was a tricky moment for Sri Lanka. It was a 50-50 situation. Anything could have happened. The country could have descended into absolute anarchy, or it could have rebuilt with patience. Thankfully, the latter happened. Sri Lanka is on the road to recovery. It's not like the economy is booming, but at least there is political and social stability, and India has played a key role in that. New Delhi gave Sri Lanka assistance worth $4 billion. It also batted for Colombo at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So it's now time for the next step, to rebuild the economy. India's Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra landed in Colombo on Monday. His mission is twofold. One, to review the progress of Indian projects. And two, chart out President Ranil Wickremesinghe's trip to India. He is expected to arrive later this month on the 21st of July. It's his first trip to India after taking office last year. Quite the delay, in fact. He was invited by Foreign Minister Jaishankar in January, but for 6 months, the trip did not happen. Now, Wickremesinghe is no stranger in New Delhi. He's been Prime Minister 5 times. He's engaged with multiple Indian governments in the past, but this time the stakes are much higher. So what does the Sri Lankan president hope to achieve? Well, 2 things. One is getting money from India, and 2, addressing India's concerns about China. Let's deal with the first one first. Sri Lanka needs financial support. The restructuring of loans. It is hoping for Indian investment, especially in energy, power and ports, and these are all crucial sectors. Both sides are keen on Trincomalee. It's a city in northeastern Sri Lanka. It is already home to a harbour. India and Sri Lanka are looking to convert it into a major port. On Sunday, an Indian diplomat in Colombo promised to keep supporting Sri Lanka. He said India will play a constructive role. So that's one agenda item. Wickremesinghe's second job is on China, to convince New Delhi of its position. Colombo says it is not interested in camp politics. It wants to be neutral between India and China. But will India accept that? The Chinese have not abandoned their plans in Sri Lanka. They're back in the mix. Companies like China Harbour Corp and Sinopec are eyeing investments. Sinopec has already been shortlisted for a project, a $4 billion refinery near Hambantota. The fact is, Colombo needs China's help. Around 20% of their debt is owed to Beijing. So without them, there is no restructuring or rebuilding, and China knows that too. All of Sri Lanka's creditors have created a joint forum, sort of like a single window to renegotiate the debt. But guess who's staying away? The Chinese. They have refused to join the other creditors. They want to work out their own deal. It's fishy even by China's standards. So Wickremesinghe needs to convince New Delhi about the China factor. And all of this discussion is based on a very important assumption. The assumption that Sri Lanka will recover. Other countries can only help. In the end, Sri Lanka will have to do the heavy lifting. And there's a problem. A lot of them, a lot of Sri Lankans are leaving the country. Around 150,000 Sri Lankans have left since January. The government says 300,000 people will have left by the end of this year, 2023. It's an exodus. Many of these people are going to Gulf countries, and the result is this. There is a labour shortage in Sri Lanka. Doctors, nurses, engineers, construction workers, all of them are in short supply. And without them, recovery will be tough. We talked about ports and refinery projects. You need people to build and operate them. So this brain drain and this loss of labour could derail the rebuilding process. What can Colombo do? They've already announced a plan to restructure domestic debt. The next step is to negotiate with foreign lenders. If all goes well, the IMF will help them. A $3 billion bailout has been struck. After a review in September, that money could be released. It's all about speed and time now. Wickremesinghe says it will be a long and hard road to recovery. But will his people stay around for the bitter pill? And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Israel. The country's parliament has given its initial nod to Prime Minister Netanyahu's judicial overhaul plan, and this has triggered protests in several parts of the country. Meanwhile, a volcano has erupted in southwest Iceland. This happened after an intense earthquake activity in the area, and heavy rain has caused floods in the US state of Vermont. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in the year 2006, a string of powerful explosions happened in India's financial capital, Mumbai. The blasts took place in local trains during evening rush hour. Nearly 200 people were killed and about 900 were injured. 9 years later, 5 convicts were given the death sentence. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching.